1 Corinthians 15:29 is part of Paul's argument justifying belief in resurrection, but does this mean that he approved of baptism for the dead? Christian apologists note that Paul used the example of eating meat in pagan temples, though he hardly approved of it. Mormon apologists respond that Paul would hardly use some heretical practice in his arguments for the resurrection. But that takes the argument to an unnecessary extreme, and there are three difficulties with the Mormon view. First, if practicing baptism for the dead is inconsistent with denying the resurrection, then so is practicing baptism upon the living. Paul understood that baptism served as an outward symbol of the resurrection of Christ, and if baptism for the dead was a normal church practice like baptism of the living, then Paul would have made a point based on baptism as a whole rather than singling out its use for the dead. Second, Paul asked why the Corinthians baptized for the dead, not why they continued to baptize for the dead. In light of the argument not being stated with relation to baptism as a whole, Paul's argument only makes sense if baptism for the dead was an unauthorized practice. If the Corinthians had been baptizing for the dead before the resurrection controversy, then Paul would have asked why they were still doing it, not merely why they were doing it. Finally, the placement and form of the admonition show that baptism for the dead was an irregular practice. Our third line of reasoning can actually be divided into three subpoints, and it's long enough that it deserves a vid of its own. We'll see you with that next time.